Hi, this is Mike from Challenge Island, Oakland County East, back with our Steamtastic Friday. We're wrapping up our cooking series today at Challenge Island. So over the last few weeks, we've talked about the S, the T, the E, the A of cooking. Today we're going to get into the M of cooking, which is the math in cooking. And there is a lot of really cool things you can do with math when it comes to cooking. So let's just talk really quickly about a few of those things. So a couple places where math comes in cooking. So of course, when you're measuring things, it's super important that you understand math so that you use the right kinds of tools, get the right amount of ingredients into whatever you're cooking. Also too, sometimes you may need to convert units depending where you got your recipe from. So we'll talk about that real quick today. And then also too, if you want to adjust a recipe, so say you want to make it bigger because you want more than what's included in the recipe, or you only have a certain amount of a certain ingredient and need to adjust everything, math comes in really handy for that as well. So let's take a quick tour through all those cool things we can use math on when we're cooking in the kitchen. So first, just to walk through, we'll talk through the English system because unfortunately it's a little more complicated than the metric one sometimes. But these are some of the measurements that you might see in a recipe. So a lot of these words look kind of odd at first, but they all connect with each other and they all kind of work together. So first one you usually see, one of the smaller ones is a teaspoon. So here's what a teaspoon looks like in real life. So just a little circle like this. Where that actually comes from is a regular spoon. So if you pulled a regular spoon out of the drawer to eat your dessert or whatever it is with it, that's usually about a teaspoon. So if you can't find your teaspoon at home, just use one of those. That'll get you started. Next one up is a tablespoon. So a long time ago, that actually was the kind of spoon they used at the table. Today, those are more commonly known as soup spoons. So if you've got soup spoons around your house, try measuring that sometime and see how that compares to a tablespoon. Should be pretty close. So, and it works out too that a tablespoon is the same as 3 teaspoons. So, if you had a recipe that called for a tablespoon and you couldn't find your tablespoon measure, just get out a teaspoon and put 3 of those in there. That should work out for you. As we work our way a little bit bigger, we could talk about cups. So if we said about a 1/4 cup, so I've got sort of an example here. So if you just went a little ways up on this measure, that would work out to about 4 tablespoons. So there again, if you're missing your 1/4 cup measure, find that tablespoon measure and you can use that instead. Work our way a little bigger. 1 cup works out to about 16 tablespoons. So here in terms of things you can practically do with those, 1/4 cup is like a really tiny coffee cup. Like if you're doing an espresso, if mom and dad were getting something like that, that would be kind of that size. So you can see compared to the hand, that one's pretty small. So a cup, like if you ever heard of a cup of coffee, actually a cup of coffee is usually a real cup. That's kind of a normal size for a cup of coffee. So here you can see the one, it's kind of a little bit bigger than this person's hand. That's about the classic size for that. It's a regular cup if you're measuring and cooking with it. So let's go just a little bit bigger. So if we put 2 cups together, that makes a pint. So one place you might see a pint if you go to the fruit section at the grocery store and get some maybe strawberries or raspberries or something like that. The little container those are in is usually about a pint. So that's kind of where that comes from or where that gets used. Put 2 pints together, you get a quart. So where you might see that at the grocery store, like those little tall thin containers of orange juice and things like that, usually come about a quart at a time. And then a gallon is 4 quarts put together. So like a gallon of milk from the store would be a really big measure. So if you're missing one of those things, just use the math, figure out what else you can use to get things measured to get your recipe off to a good start. So another thing that is super important, especially if you want to try a recipe maybe from another country, is you might need to convert some things. So for example, we did a Steamtastic Friday several months ago where we talked more about where these come from. So feel free to search on that one if you want to find out more. But temperature. So in metric, it's Celsius. In English terms, it's Fahrenheit. So those were 2 scientists back in the 1800s that each came up with some different ways to do it. So unfortunately, they're kind of different. So we have to convert if we go from one to the other. So just for example, if we're freezing water, that's 0 degrees Celsius. In Fahrenheit terms, that works out to 32 degrees. Or if we go to the other end, if we're boiling water, that'd be about 100 degrees Celsius. Works out to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can do the math and take those back and forth and use a recipe from another country if it tells you what to cook at in one of those temperatures. Also too, the amount of food. So all those scoops and cups we were just talking about earlier, we can convert those to metric too. So one good place to start, a teaspoon is really close to about 5 milliliters. So that's like 5/1000ths of a liter. And a liter is about a quart roughly when you're doing it. So if you do the math up and down with all those things we showed you, you could take that fact and then work back and forth. So maybe try that at home. See if you can figure out how many milliliters are in a tablespoon, how many milliliters are in a cup, and see if you can work your way all the way up to this. So if you went all the way up to a gallon, that should work out to just a little bit under 4 liters. So if you're measuring that in the store, that's what that would come to. All right, then the last kind of fun we can have, or practical things we can do with math and cooking, is to adjust recipes. So let's say I had a recipe for some chocolate chip cookies. Let's say I used 2 eggs, but I want twice as many cookies as what that recipe shows. Then I would have to double each of those things in my recipe. So if it asked for 2 eggs, I'd make it 4 eggs. If it asked for half of a teaspoon of salt maybe, I'd double that, so that would be 1 teaspoon of salt. I can do it the other way too. Let's say I got all excited about making all those cookies, then I looked in my refrigerator and realized, oh darn, the recipe asked for 2 eggs. I only have 1 egg. So how do I adjust everything that way? Well, we kind of go the other direction. So instead of multiplying, then we end up dividing in the recipe to use what we've got. So we would have to cut things in half. So if I'm gonna go from 2 eggs to 1 egg, I can only make half a batch of cookies today. So if I look through the recipe, say it asked for 2 teaspoons of vanilla, that would become 1 teaspoon. Or a little trickier one, let's say it asked for 3 cups of flour, I'd have to take 3 divided by 2, I'd get 3/2 or 1.5 cups of flour. So we can go up and down just because the recipe makes a certain quantity. That doesn't mean we're stuck with that. We can make it bigger or smaller just using the power of math. So next time mom and dad are cooking something, see if you can help out a little bit and have some fun with the math. See if you can make the recipe bigger or smaller. Try using some different measuring scoops than what you normally would use. See if you can get all that to work out. The power of math will be a big help for you on that. All right, with that, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.